Hi, everyone. Welcome to a special GZERO media live stream, Big Impact, Small Businesses, and Global Pandemic Recovery. I'm JJ Ramberg. I've reported on small businesses for nearly 2 decades, and I'm also a founder and owner of 2 companies myself. So I know how important this conversation is to millions of businesses and owners in every corner of the world. Very special thanks to GZERO's sponsor today, Visa, and to many of you who have already weighed in on our viewer polls and social media. And for those of you watching live, you can participate as well. If you are on GZERO's site right now, you'll see a chat window to the right of the video screen on a desktop or below the player on a mobile device. So you can sign in there to cast your vote. Here's the first question. Poll number 1. 2 years into the COVID-19 pandemic, I feel my nation's economy is improving, is about the same, or has gotten worse. More on your responses in just a moment. First, we just heard in that video some of the reasons why small businesses are so critically important to the global economy. And while there are big reasons for hope right now, recovery has been, to say the least, uneven. And there are new crises like the Ukraine to confront. I'm joined now by Ian Bremmer, president of Eurasia Group and GZERO Media, and Jenny Mundy, global SVP, merchant sales and acquiring at GZERO. Welcome to both of you.
Good to see you.
Ian, let's start with you. Before we speak specifically about small businesses, I want to just understand the global economy in a macro sense at this point in the pandemic.
Well, there's no question that the biggest change that we've seen from the pandemic has been a growth of inequality, massively greater debt in terms of the countries that are least capable of actually affording it. And we've actually seen that from just earlier today. Kristalina Georgieva from the IMF has talked about the extraordinary debt burden that's being carried right now as a consequence of 2 years of needing to make serious capital allocations to deal with all this dislocation by these governments, but without having the debt space to be able to engage in it. And of course, as interest rates get higher, it's going to be harder for them. So that's one big piece. And the second big piece, for the last 40, 50 years, the big global economic story has been a rising global middle class. That's getting harder because of the challenges of the pandemic. For the first time, we're seeing an increase in extreme poverty, and we're also seeing an increase in extreme hunger. And unfortunately, you mentioned Russia, but on the back of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, where we're going to see more inflation, more challenges in energy prices, particularly more challenges in food prices, most of that is going to be borne on the backs of the poorest countries and the poorest people in those countries. Starvation rates are going to go up. Financial crises are going to increase as well. So the United States, Europe, a lot of countries that are wealthy have the ability to get through these challenges. The poorest countries in the world, the poorest people in the world really do not.
Well, Ian, then I want to get to the results of the poll then and then dive into them a little bit with you. So if we ask again, 2 years into the COVID-19 pandemic, I feel my nation's economy, and you'll see that the results have gotten worse, is 44%. Though I have to imagine that most of the people answering this poll probably came from the nations that you were talking about that were doing better. So what does that mean for the rest of the world?
Well, first of all, it means that even if the economy is doing well, when you see big inflation, you think if you get a 5% raise, that's because you worked hard or you deserved it. But if goods are 5% higher, you're really unhappy about that. And historically, periods of high inflation, especially when you're not used to it. We haven't had this level of inflation 40 years in the United States, really does affect consumer sentiment across the board. I think that is having a big impact in the US, having a big impact in Europe. It's impressive that the American public today is willing to pay higher gas prices, even given where they are right now, because of what Russia has done in Ukraine in the past 4 weeks. But it doesn't make people happier about the economy. Biden's seeing that in his numbers. We're also seeing it with higher numbers of inflation across Europe and really around the world. So I'm not surprised that the numbers are bad, but I also think that in the advanced industrial economies, most people, given the stage we're at right now in the pandemic in particular, should be feeling a little bit better objectively about where they are than we just saw in that poll.
Right. But as you're right, when you go to the market and your market bill is whatever percentage, it's hard to have that feeling. Jenny, let's move over to small businesses in general, small, medium-sized businesses. Where do they stand right now?
Hi, JJ. Yeah, and thank you. Well, interestingly, small businesses are feeling optimistic. So reasons to feel positive. I think when COVID first began, and of course, small businesses, in my view anyway, are often extremely innovative and creative. And so small businesses had to start to change their business model, and they did. And they needed to do that, as we all experienced, to actually survive. But now they're starting to use that new online capability, whether that's by having an e-commerce presence or more presence on social media or click and collect, to actually really start to grow their business. We've been keeping our finger on the pulse over the past couple of years, not only through Visa's network and data insights, but also by actually surveying small businesses. So throughout the pandemic, we've run a back to business study. We've done 6 of those. The last one was in January. And we've also done some quite broad surveys globally, and both these surveys are global, through our Visa Economic Empowerment Institute. So the back to business study, the key findings there were that 90% of small businesses in 9 different markets around the world, both established economies and developing economies, were optimistic about the future of their business, which is, I mean, an incredibly high number. And actually, through the pandemic, at the very beginning of the pandemic, 75% of them were optimistic. And that number has just increased each time we've run that study. And in the Visa Economic Empowerment Institute study, we found that really businesses are seeking the tools to be able to operate in a digital age. That's one of the key things that comes out as part of their requirements. And that digitizing really helped their resilience. It helped them, as I said, survive through the pandemic. And now it's going to help them thrive. And even in developing economies, and markets, we're seeing them actually not call out a priority on more funding or support from government, but calling out for things like better internet, better digital payments, helping them to connect into digital marketplaces as coming out as, top of their priority stack.
Ian, do you have any sense of why consumers might feel like things are getting worse and small businesses feel optimistic?
Well, first of all, I think small businesses are feeling a much more flexible environment. I mean, you're seeing that people understand that they're able to work pretty much from anywhere. The technology has been incredibly empowering, and these companies are the ones that really need, sort of ease of access to market. Also, there's been a lot of capital, especially in the United States. I mean, interest rates have been extremely low, and that has meant that it's much easier for a lot of companies to be able to get themselves organized and started. So combine that with the fact that you've had 2 years of a whole bunch of people thinking about their life choices, and with very significant amounts of cash outlay that's come from the developed world. The Europeans put an extraordinary amount of money to redistribute income to poor people across Europe that actually needed it. In the United States, the trillions of dollars that were spent on small businesses, on individuals, some of whom were unemployed, some of whom were underemployed. That has led to higher inflation. It makes consumers anxious, but it also has allowed more entrepreneurship. And I think that that's a pretty big deal. So this is a double-edged sword that cuts into both a negative and a positive way.
All right. Thanks so much. Hang tight, you two. We have a lot more to talk about. But ahead of this program, GZERO spoke to small business owners to hear how the pandemic has impacted them. And we wanted to share a couple of their stories with you. The first one comes from Annabelle Santos. Take a look.
Hello, I'm Annabelle Santos from Spa Day. Welcome to my studio. Spa Day is plant-based. I use the very best fruits, olive oil, and herbs to create formulas that make you feel better. I founded Spa Day in 2014 because my daughter had severe eczema when she was a baby, and nothing on the market was able to relieve her symptoms. As a Filipino American, I grew up surrounded by flowers and plants in the garden, and my background in biochemistry really helped to enable me to make products that worked for her skin. So in the beginning, I was making products out of my apartment in New York City. a small apartment, and I had to set up a table and a little lab. And that was really challenging because I would have to clear the table to put dinner on the table and then feed 2 kids. But after a few years, I was able to get into a very large retail store. The pandemic actually hit my business so hard because I had just gotten into the whole Northeast region of Whole Foods and literally shipped my products to store the week before New York City got shut down. The people who worked for me, they stopped coming in, and I went back to working from home for a little bit. I was fortunate enough to win several grants, which really helped me to stay in business. So I won this amazing grant from Clover to receive this device, which enables me to offer hands-free credit card processing. Tap, and nobody ever has to get worried about sanitizing their hands. The pandemic has taught me so much about humanity, that without each other, we have nothing. I can't imagine a world without Spa Day, and I hope that I could be an influence for other people who are trying to create their dreams, to manifest a better world and a healthier life and a healthier planet.
I am so sorry. Again, I was making fun of other people for it being March of 2020 in their room, putting on mute. But I hope you enjoyed that video. We're going to be hearing from experts and entrepreneurs like Annabelle throughout this program. But right now, I'd like to bring in Veronique Willems, Secretary General of SME United, which represents more than 22 million small businesses in Europe, employ more than 82 million people. And also joining us is Tom Sullivan, VP of Small Business Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having us, JJ.
Listening to that video, it just brings me back right to those early days of the pandemic where supply chains were hard and employees and everyone was scrambling what to do. And it was such a difficult time for everyone, small businesses in particular. But the European continent is experiencing yet another crisis disrupting supply chains, which poses economic risks. And I just want to ask you about that. But first, just give us a sense of the state of small businesses among your member organizations right now.
Well, I must say I have a less positive picture to paint than what Jenny just mentioned. We published our SME barometer last week. And based on figures of autumn of last year, where of course we had spikes again of COVID with the new variations coming up, quarantines were being quite high among staff of SMEs. Again, several member states of the European Union decided to shut down activities. So their confidence, which was at an all-time high in spring of 2021, dropped again in autumn 2021. And we fear now with the Ukraine crisis that, of course, that will go further down, especially since energy prices were already increasing end of last year. Disruption of the supply chains was also still going on. But now on top of that, we get, of course, energy prices that are really skyrocketing through the roof. I hear entrepreneurs who have tripled or even more their energy cost, which cannot immediately also factor that through in their prices, of course. So the sentiment, let's say, is a big uncertainty at the moment.
At the height of the pandemic, the EU adopted a $900 billion stimulus agreement that was historic in both scope and size. So I want to know what impact that had on small businesses then, and then if there's a lasting impact on it now as you face all of these other issues.
Well, the next generation EU package was approved, of course, in summer, but then had to be put in place through the national recovery and resilience plans who have been rolled out throughout the last few months, where we see that in certain programs, they have already used all the funds. For instance, there was they really earmarked part of the funds for digitalization, part of the funds for green transition, where we see that in some member states, the funds for green transition have already been used right now. So I would say big success. We also hear that some of our members say that not all funds are really dedicated to small companies. So there's also still a lot of negotiations going on how and where to spend the funds. So that remains a bit of a point of attention, I would say. In any case, throughout the pandemic and at the beginning of the pandemic, we have had several support programs at European level, also with a temporary state aid framework, allowing member states to support companies a lot more than what they are normally allowed to. And that has allowed, for instance, with temporary work schemes, has allowed many SMEs to keep their team on board while paying them a certain amount, so that indeed what Ian also mentioned before, that they wouldn't get into poverty. And it also allowed member states to provide income compensation to self-employed, which has also been a major support for those companies who couldn't do anything even online.
Tom, let's move to here in the US. What about small businesses here? How the massive stimulus efforts helpful and where there's still need?
Well, thank you, JJ. At the US Chamber of Commerce, we represent about 3 million businesses of really every sector, every geography. And about 96% of our member companies have fewer than 100 employees. About 75% of our member companies have fewer than 10 employees. That includes about 1,600 local, state, and regional chambers of commerce. And just building on Veronique's comments, in the United States, we do see a tremendous amount of optimism. However, echoing Ian's comments, that optimism is underneath a very heavy, wet blanket of inflation, and that is dampening down some of that optimism. You asked about COVID relief. I mean, for me, working in Washington, D.C., seeing Congress come together in a bipartisan fashion and pass 7 laws in less than 12 months, all dedicated to helping small business, really impressive. And I think we know the results of that activity. I created PPP, which is one of the few acronyms almost every American small business owner understands, as well as a combined total of $1 trillion of both PPP and SBA's disaster loans, which are called economic injury disaster loans, EIDLs. I've heard reference from small businesses all across the country using words like lifesaver. And most small businesses who benefited from these relief programs believe that they would not have been able to survive COVID, but for government coming together with the relief package.
I think you're very right, just from personal experience with everyone that I spoke to in the midst of that. What about jobs, though, Tom? Small businesses are the biggest employers in the US, but the story that we keep hearing is that people cannot fill jobs. There are jobs out there that are open, but they're not filled.
Well, JJ, thank you for asking about what really is front of mind for every small business owner I talk with, because the optimism of growth and success depends largely on growing their employee count. We work with MetLife and survey businesses every quarter. Our latest survey shows just under 50% of small businesses have jobs that they're not able to fill. Now, even more importantly, is the data that show that over 65% say it hasn't changed. Now, the good news from an employee perspective is that 85% of small businesses have raised wages. So getting and keeping small business employees is really front of mind on Main Street. What I hear, which is really interesting, are from small businesses who say, this is an opportunity to lean into their smallness. The collective community that has really embraced small business as a matter of survival is that same community that can provide workers and employees. So what I've seen really over the last few months are small businesses trying to crack that nut of hiring good, qualified, and willing employees by going back to those communities and then asking those communities to provide them with good workers. And you see really a heightened degree of loyalty between those communities and the small employers. And quite frankly, JJ, a lot of the small businesses can provide flexibilities that some of their larger competitors can't. And that is very attractive for today's potential employee.
Veronique, do you see this issue globally as well?
I hear the same issues with entrepreneurs in Europe. They had already huge issues ahead of the COVID pandemic, finding skilled staff who would be able to reply to the questions they get from customers. We've had entrepreneurs who indeed indicated that they were missing out huge numbers of turnover due to the fact that they couldn't find the staff to really work and do the service offering or developing the products. Throughout the pandemic, as I mentioned, they have been doing a lot to be able to keep their team together. And what we see now is that indeed many entrepreneurs are still struggling to find the right profiles, the right persons for their team. Skilled staff, finding really the persons who have the skills that are needed on the labor market. And then, of course, you also have certain sectors who have been shut down for quite a long time throughout the pandemic, where staff at a certain point did decide to go and look for success somewhere else. And they are now really struggling to find people when things are picking up again. So I would say, indeed, throughout the whole world, we see similar problems on finding the right staff to fill in the vacancies.
So Jenny, small businesses may have capital, but they have so many other problems coming at them, right? Labor shortages, supply chain, et cetera. How are multinational corporations like yours, like Visa, helping small businesses?
Well, we definitely believe we have a role to play. And JJ, as you pointed out, in the US, it might be 50% of the volume of employees work for small businesses, and globally, 90% of all businesses globally are small businesses, and they drive most economies in the world. And it's really important for all of us that we help them thrive. And certainly we feel that. Back at the beginning of 2020, we set out a target to digitally enable 50 million more small businesses. We're just shy already of hitting half of that target. And the way we do that is through partnering with governments, partnering with other private enterprises, all sorts of different examples. So an American example is where we've committed $1 million in small grants and fees to minority SMB owners in the most hardest hit cities and towns around the US. Another example from the UK, where I'm sitting today, we partner with a local company called Shop Appy, and their mission is to help high streets, local small town high streets, go online. So whether it's a butcher, for example, who hasn't gone into being a butcher because he or she wanted to be a tech-savvy online player, they love their product, they love their customers, and Shop Appy helps those small towns go online. And by partnering and supporting initiatives like that, I think Visa and other major corporations, we have a large role to play, and we're very happy to step up to that.
Fantastic. Stay with me, all of you, for a second. I want to take a quick break from this conversation to highlight another business owner who is experiencing her own supply chain issues. Isabel Ness is from Belgium. She runs a hair salon and wig business, and she has expressed some specific concerns about how the war is going to impact her business.
My name is Isabel Ness, and I have a hair salon in Belgium, 3 full-time employees, and I also doing wig business. I'm hair professional oncologist, so I also have a special part in the salon who is selling wigs and hair toppers for people who are suffering from hair loss. During the pandemic, my business was really impacted. I needed to close my salon. We tried to sell some shampoo and some accessories to have a little bit cash. The rent kept going. the insurance kept going, so everything kept going, but we didn't get any money. Yes, in my wig business, we have a lot of supply chain problems. Prices went up, the quality went down, and it takes the waiting time now for a hairpiece not custom made, for example, is more than 1 year. On the one hand, I have a blooming business now after Corona because people are start living again, but then we have this war. So yeah, it's not easy time now, not easy time, and I'm not complaining because I'm doing good business, but to be scared for a war is different to be scared for the pandemic. So I'm concerned that people are saving their money and wait until the situation is stable or the war stops.
Tom, I want to focus on the supply chain issues. There's so many things coming at Isabel there, but supply chain issues have a ripple effect everywhere, including here. So how do you see that playing out in the US? I know I, for one, a focus group of one here went to go buy sneakers for my kids the other day and couldn't get them. They're all out, right, of the store that we went to. What else are you seeing?
Well, thank you. When we polled, our most recent poll just a couple of weeks ago with MetLife showed that 76% of small businesses are concerned about supply chains. And then I think very interesting was data showing that 61% of small businesses have taken steps to rejigger their supply chain to keep up with the different challenges that we're experiencing. I mean, bottom line is that it's just costing more for small businesses to operate. And small businesses do not like raising prices. They are forced to raise prices to keep up and to make a profit. But it is against their nature, and that is an overwhelming sentiment I receive from small businesses related to supply chain.
Let's move now for a moment to talk about some trends that have emerged over the past years. I want to share them with you. I thought this was fascinating. While we heard about all the businesses that closed during the 16-month period from March 2020 to June 2021, and we didn't even have to hear about it. We just had to walk down our main streets and see all those shuttered stores. That time also marked a record high for new startups. Here's the story of one entrepreneur in Tokyo who fell in love with juice bars while working in the US and saw an opportunity to take that trend back home with her.
My name is Shizuka, and I'm running juice bar in Tokyo, Japan. I started this store 2019 because when I was in New York, juice stores everywhere and the people get them as supplement. Running juice bar is not so common in Japan. It's tough to do it because people don't know smoothie is very good for their health. Pandemic starts and life definitely changed, and it's more difficult because the number of customers decreased and the sales as well under the pandemic condition. We had support from government, but I don't know how to use those properly. I didn't know how to promote in the pandemic situation. Now I'm watching outside from my store, but still not a lot of people working on the street. It's changed a little bit, but it's not like before. People use delivery services or online services, but people can't see each other. It's kind of sad for me, and that's why I'm having store. Face-to-face is everything for me, so I want those things back.
That was a story out of Tokyo, but Jenny, I am fascinated by the numbers from a survey that you did in the US that showed that 58% of new business owners said that they created their businesses during COVID because they lacked other options, and 42% did so because they saw a business opportunity. Was that surprising to you? And what have you learned from just talking to some of these entrepreneurs over the last couple of years?
Yeah, it was a surprise. And actually, COVID has almost ushered in a new business boom. There were more new businesses started through COVID than at any time since 2007 in the US. And I've got the numbers here, 40% higher on average than during the same month in 2019. So a real kick up. And you're right, I mean, that was a surprise. So the research that we did actually showed that there was two real drivers for starting business. The main one, 58%, started their business because their whole lives had changed. And I think we can all relate to this, and pretty much all of us experienced it. You were juggling very, very different things. You were trying to fit in kids and being locked down and possibly losing a job or losing an income. And so a necessity was born of really needing to start something that could fit into your new life. And I think we probably all know people who've experienced exactly that. And it gives them the flexibility to do that. Interestingly, I think the other 42% said they'd spotted a new need, a new niche, something that they felt passionate about that they could then fill. So really two drivers, but the biggest one by far was this: my world has changed, I can find a new way to live my life, being the key driver.
Well, and that, it seems to me, explains in part the next thing that you found out in your surveys, which was that new businesses created in COVID were more likely to have a female CEO than pre-existing businesses, which just anecdotally makes sense to me because women had to leave the workplace in such high numbers because they were facing so many pressures from home, from work, they couldn't do it all at once.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And, it's great to see so many female CEOs now emerging. And I was just reflecting, all of the little video vignettes and stories we've seen have been amazing women starting businesses. So, we're seeing it sort of play back to us, I guess.
Well, it's interesting. What I'm fascinated to see is how many of these businesses last, right? I mean, most small businesses do fail after 5 years or before 5 years, even before a year. And so do you have any sense of the strength of these new companies?
Well, one thing I can say is that the world is not about to revert back to the model that it had before. I think we've seen in every country in the world that this rise of moving to more e-com, to changing the way that we live our lives, to changing our shopping behaviors. And we've heard a great clip around contactless as well. So a shift to digital in all its forms is definitely here to stay. Even countries which have emerged from COVID and are in a very different space, these patterns are still remaining. So I think all businesses, small businesses and large, need to be confident that the change they've seen in their business is here to stay. It's not going to be reversing.
I think it will be interesting also as we go forward to dig into how many of these are sole proprietors and how many of these companies actually have employees. But Tom, I want to move to you. And I know you were saying that your wife is one of these people who started a business during the pandemic because she had more flexibility as an owner of a company. But when we think about the survival of these companies, we talked a lot about this during the Great Recession. And now we have this whole new challenge coming at us. So what do small businesses need in order to keep growing, to keep thriving, to survive?
Well, thank you. I'll just build on Jenny's comments for a moment, because I think it's good for us to compare startup and entrepreneurship coming out of the recession of 2008 and 2009 and coming out of COVID. So as we discussed prior to this event, it took close to 10 years for new small business growth to go on an upward trajectory after the recession. It took just 4 months for that same upward growth to happen after COVID. And one of the reasons, and it's the great unifier of what Jenny was describing, and that is small businesses are problem solvers. And really, when you think about it, there were really no bigger and more condensed problems than what we experienced at the beginning of COVID. And in swooped small businesses and entrepreneurs to solve those problems. As far as what's needed to keep that trajectory going upward, I'll just use the words of our CEO, who also was a small business owner herself, Suzanne Clark. She talks about how our government partners need to be enablers and not inhibitors. And we're already going down that path in a very positive way. SBA Administrator Isabel Guzman has been really focusing on the partners who can be with those small businesses in growth stages, in startup stages, in order to get them one-stop shops on how to grow, how to access funding, how to access some of the projects that will be going on with infrastructure. Those partnerships are primarily with small business development centers that are co-located with universities and community colleges in almost every district in the United States, as well as an online version called SCORE. So there is an existing partnership model that is able to work with small businesses truly as enablers. And we think that that is actually doubling down on that partnership model is what it's going to take to really keep that upward trajectory of small business growth on the right track.
I'm so glad you mentioned SCORE. I think it is a resource out there that is people don't know quite enough about. And so I'm glad that you put it out there for us. Veronique Williams, Tom Sullivan, thank you so much for joining us today. Ian Bremmer and Jenny Mundy are going to stay with us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Ian, Jenny, I want to talk about technology and how the pandemic absolutely accelerated the need for digital tools. I mean, look, we're doing this whole program on Zoom right now, and it changed digital and consumer behaviors globally, and adapting to these changes will be critical for small businesses moving forward. Let's go to our second viewer poll. We asked our audience on social media the following. During the pandemic, I have shopped more online, used more contactless payment methods, changed where I shop based on digital options, or all of the above. We're going to see the answers to those in a minute, but first I want to welcome our next guest, Chris Sakalakis, CEO of Kiva. Great to see you, Chris. Hey, Chris, I believe you're on mute. And you know what? You get a pass for that because I did it earlier in the show.
Yeah, indeed I am. Sorry, I was standing by quietly here. Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
No problem. Well, you get points for that. Well, it's really great to see you. And I'm very familiar with Kiva. I think I was one of the first people actually to do something fun company through Kiva. But for those in the audience who aren't familiar with it, can you explain sort of your quick elevator pitch?
Yeah, so Kiva is the way that anyone can invest in humanity one person at a time. We are a nonprofit that started in 2005 with a mission of increasing financial inclusion, increasing financial access to the underserved people around the world. The main way that people can use Kiva, if you go to kiva.org, is as a potential lender, you can choose a borrower and can contribute as little as $25 towards a loan that goes to an entrepreneur somewhere in one of over 70 countries around the world. So that's the basic idea behind Kiva. We use technology to crowdfund loans that go to the financially underserved.
Did you see growth? I would imagine you saw growth in demand from the receivers of the funds. Did you see growth in demand of the, I guess, their donations kind of the people giving the funds over the last couple of years?
We have seen growth in 2021 versus 2020, but that's after we saw a decrease in 2020. So the effects of the pandemic initially were in 2020 that we saw fewer people coming to Kiva to lend money. And it's not a donation, but it's not a money-making proposition either. So if you're a lender on Kiva, you get 0% interest, and the loans are repaid at historically about 96%. So effectively, it's a negative 4% interest rate. But unlike a donation, a lot of the money does come back and then it can be reused. So if you put in $25 today, that $25 can fund $150 worth of loans over the course of a few years. So what we saw last year in 2021 is we rebounded to levels from before. We kind of rebounded from the initial 2020 pandemic year. And certainly on the borrower side, yes, we saw a lot more interest in people who wanted to raise funds in order to support their businesses.
Congratulations, and thank you for correcting me on that. I put my money in and let it keep going. So, but you're absolutely right that this is not a donation. You can get your money back if you'd like to, and at your amazing rates. Jenny, an overwhelming 82% of SMBs surveyed by Visa said that they plan to accept some form of digital option in 2022, and 73% see accepting new forms of payments as fundamental to their business growth. So what needs to happen to get more small businesses connected to digital marketplaces?
Yeah, and I think it's a big challenge. Often small businesses don't go into business, as I said, because they're in love with the technology. Clearly some do, but let's say they're a minority. You know, your small business owner is there because they're passionate about the service that they're offering, and they're passionate about the problem that they're solving, or the product that we've got. And really making sure that payments is a key point, and embedded deeply into the customer experience, I think is really important. But you've got to make sure when you're thinking about offering technology as integrated into your offer, that it's going to work, that it's secure. And we know small businesses increasingly are thinking about cybersecurity. They're also thinking about how they connect the front end of their business to the back end of their business. How do you make sure that if let's say you're running a small restaurant, that you've got the reservations coming in, that you can manage staff, that you can pay people, all of those aspects together. And technology increasingly is coming to the fore to be able to solve these problems. And what we're also seeing is increasing number of technology providers who will solve more than one of these problems. So we're seeing aggregating type platforms that offer a whole range of services to small businesses. And I think, this is a great opportunity for small businesses, because as they have grown and as have their digital needs, so have the number of potential providers to solve those problems. So I urge small businesses to seek these players out. Quite often they are there, and they're very industry vertically focused. So a restaurant business, for example, or tourism, or hairdressers. And I think that's a wonderful opportunity for small businesses. So look around. There are definitely players and partners who can help you solve those technical issues, solve them very well, and deliver a fantastic service for your end customers, which is really what it's all about.
It is amazing how many plug and play tools there are right now that really work well, at least when you're starting your company. If we just focus right on e-commerce, where do you see e-commerce is growing the most rapidly, and what does that mean for all of us?
Yeah, and I mean, there's no question that e-commerce is growing rapidly in every country. I've got some great stats. So this is 2021 data from Euromonitor, but a few things really jump out that I think I certainly found them interesting. E-com in the UK, 21% of all retail spending in the UK. That's up almost 6 points since 2019. In the US, it grew from 12.8% to just over 17%. Another big growth. And in Brazil, 16% of all retail is now e-com, and that's more than doubled since 2019. So really rapid. South Africa, it's still got a way to go. It's still only 3.5%. But that is more than double what it was in 2019. But probably the Philippines is the star of the countries we've looked at. E-commerce there finished 2021 at 10% or 9.8%, and that grew 2.5 times from 2019. So wherever we look around the world, we're seeing e-com, the rise in e-com. I mean, we've all read the headlines that, have we traveled a decade in the last 2 years or 5 years? We've certainly traveled at light speed, and we don't see that reversing.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at the boxes in front of everyone's house in my neighborhood, it's an indication of something. Every day, boxes lined up. Chris, the flip side of all of these great digital tools is training. And so how can we help, and how can we ensure small business owners globally are taught the necessary skills and get the training for both consumer-facing digital tools and then also the tools that they're using within their own offices?
Yeah, so businesses that Kiva works with, that our platform supports with access to capital, are typically the smallest businesses. They're single entrepreneurs or solo entrepreneurs and starting businesses. And for most of them, their chief need is training around business, just understanding business planning, understanding pricing, marketing, the fundamentals. And about half of the borrowers on our platform get that type of training. The additional digital training of how to operate an e-commerce site or those types of things, that's kind of next level. But in terms of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it starts with that basic fundamental business training that all business owners need.
And how do you get that training to them around the world and all these tiny businesses?
Well, we work with a network of over 300 partners around the world. Most of them are microfinance institutions. And part of what they do, in addition to vetting these borrowers and facilitating the loan, is they also provide some level of training. So even in the United States, where we have partners we work with, there's one in New York that teaches people how to be farmers and runs all the farmers markets in New York City, as an example. And a lot of that, the funding for that training comes from our partners like the Visa Foundation, the MasterCard Foundation, PayPal, and others who support that training, in addition to the loans that are funded by our lenders.
Ian, this just puts a spotlight on equality. And so right now, Chris is talking about teaching people marketing, while we have Jenny talking about teaching people how to use advanced tools and digital tools. And so I have to imagine that digital equality is a geopolitical issue that you think about a lot.
Of course it is. And I mean, one of the major silver linings of the pandemic is the fact that technology companies and investment in infrastructure did move basically 10 years over the course of 18 months. And that didn't just mean that, late users and late adopters in the United States suddenly were engaged in e-commerce, but it also meant that places that weren't as digitized, like Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia and Southeast Asia, got up to speed and had more people connected much more quickly. That's been absolutely one of the most objectively positive stories about where the world is going to be heading, global population, as we look 10, 20 years out. But I will say that because we talk about digital inclusion so much, when we talk about the advanced industrial economies, we also talk about privacy. We talk about data. We talk about concerns about whether algorithms are hurting and polarizing populations. When we talk about poor populations, we only talk about digital inclusivity, and we haven't gotten to any of these potential downsides of civil societies and of data and of privacy. And we're going to need to be having those arguments, those discussions. We're going to need to provide those resources for the poorer communities around the world that are just getting online as well.
Is there a chance then for us to start with more of a blank slate, right? We know the problems that come. So is there a chance for us to stop them before they get too big in some of these areas that are just coming online?
I'm an analyst by training. And so I'm the kind of person that believes that you can't fix a problem until you understand it. And in the same way that it took us decades to get the world to understand what climate change was, and now we have a group of 195 countries that every year get together and say, here's the state of the world climate. And because everyone signed up to it, we don't actually have a lot of fake news. We don't have a lot of people that are saying, no, climate change isn't happening anymore. We don't have that for artificial intelligence. We don't have that for digital inclusion. So what we need to start would be an intergovernmental panel for artificial intelligence, basically an IPAI, just like the IPCC on climate change, that the United Nations needs to basically support and foster, but it needs to be public sector, private sector, and it needs to be actual scientists, the people that understand what the issues are. You can't fix this for the world until you first understand the challenge. That's where the institution building needs to start.
Thanks. That is a whole nother show that requires a lot of attention. I want to get to the results of our poll really quickly, our last poll. We said during the pandemic, I have shopped more online, used more contactless payments, changed where I shop based on digital options. And this is not surprising to me, the biggest answer is all of the above at 56%. Jenny, that is good news for when we look at digital ways to pay and shop, et cetera. but also it means that there is increased cyber risk. And so how can companies expand into the digital realm while remaining safe and secure? You alluded to this before, but I'd love to hear you expand upon that.
Yeah, and we know, and it came out actually in our last survey, but one from the consumers, where this is something that consumers are concerned around, and small businesses. And in fact, a third of consumers that we surveyed said they'd actually stop shopping at a store with a brand due to a fraudulent experience. So it is driving what we are prepared to do and not do. And of course, AI can help. And certainly at Visa, it's something that we use a lot to ensure that our network and any transactions that flow on it are amazingly safe and secure. But I definitely think for small businesses, as they're starting to choose the technology providers that they work with, that this is one of the things that they're asking. This is one of the things on their checklist when they're thinking about what does this technology provider do for me? And they should be asking the questions around cybersecurity. They should be asking the questions around some of that deep tech capability that they should be able to rely on. And it's going to be, and we can see it's going to be, we can see it already coming through in the surveys, and we can see it coming through. I think Ian's point's absolutely right. As the whole world digitizes, ensuring that we have the security there, that we're managing the fraud and the risk is something that we just need to continue to put that emphasis on and continue to ask our providers about.
Well, I think it's incredibly scary as a small business owner with limited funds, limited skills internally, to think of something happening like this, because this is, for the most part, something that a lot of small businesses don't have internally. So, Chris, that gets to the idea that there are lots of costs here. There's costs when it comes to security, everything else we've talked about, infrastructure, skilling, energy. Who's responsible for this? I know you have some great partnerships. But in general, for small businesses and the economy, should we be looking at public-private partnerships to expand digital access to businesses?
Absolutely. I think no one individual or one group can fund what needs to get done in order to support these businesses. The businesses we work with, the borrowers we work with, are resilient, and so they will ask for money and get that money. But in addition to that, we are trying to provide additional help and support through this business education that we mentioned. And as I said before, we have our lenders who come in and put in dollars to support loans. And then on top of that, we have partners who come in to support those loans with education and other services. So I mentioned the Visa Foundation, MasterCard Foundation, PayPal, and others. But there are systemic things that we can do to improve the overall system while these loans are being facilitated. So one example of what we're doing at Kiva is we're trying to create a digital identity system where you can use a fingerprint to open a bank account. And that would make it much easier for people to open a bank account. Obviously, if you have a business, that's important. And it would give people access to a credit history that follows them. That's a core technology that we're trying to implement in Honduras, and that's being supported by the Skoll Foundation, RippleWorks, a few others. So there are lots of people in philanthropy, foundations, and others who are interested in attacking fundamental problems in order to make systemic changes. And so that's been another resource for us in helping small businesses.
Chris Sakalakis, CEO of Kiva, thank you so much for your time. And one thing you probably didn't know about me, I worked in microfinance for a while, so I've seen firsthand the kind of changes you're making for people, for families, for communities, for humanity. So thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you, JJ.
And in our remaining few moments here, I just want to give both you, Ian and Jenny, a chance to offer some closing thoughts about today's conversation. So Jenny, let's start with you. What stood out for you on what we talked about today?
A few things for me. I think firstly, listening to Veronique, she's absolutely right. The world is uncertain, and we heard that through some of the videos as well. The situation feels very uncertain. But I think the optimism of small businesses, their resilience, and also their can-do perspective of working through issues will always remain at the fore, and we should feel encouraged by that. I think now, more than ever though, now the world has really shifted online or to digital in many different ways, shapes and forms. Customer experience will be king. I mean, ever was it thus, but even more now. So for small businesses, really thinking about how they deliver that fantastic experience to their customers. And of course, safe, secure, seamless payments. I would say that, but they're really important to embed that into that customer experience. And there's lots of ways and lots of tech companies that can help them do that. They don't need to be experts. And lastly, I'd say security is key. We've talked about cyber. It will remain important. And I really urge everyone to think about how they can build that security and resilience into their businesses.
And Ian, we cannot escape the bad news that has been coming at us over the past couple of years. Where do you see signs of hope?
Signs of hope is that we have a collective experience as humanity in this pandemic. Everyone has been touched by it. Everyone has had to deal with the uncertainty, with the illness, with the loss of life of someone they know, in some cases a loved one. And after 2 years of that, people are rethinking. They've become more introspective. They're saying, well, maybe I don't need to spend all that time with people I don't care as much about. Maybe I want to work more flexibly. Maybe I want to go to the office every day. Maybe I don't want to work for a big faceless corporation. Maybe I want to be closer to the purpose of my organization. Maybe I want the work to mean more to me. And I think that ultimately is one of the most hopeful messages, not just for small and medium businesses, but also for the people that actually work there. You know, I mean, before the pandemic hit, when we talked about work, one of the biggest issues that was coming up was the fact that labor didn't matter as much, that people were getting displaced by artificial intelligence after they were getting displaced by free trade, that suddenly their entire worth was being thrown out the window. And if they didn't retrain and reskill, well, and if they didn't have the capacity to do that, then maybe they weren't good for anything. This last 2 years has not been just about the importance of labor, but it's about the human experience. It's about individual people from countries all over the world saying, what do I want to do? What do I find valuable? That's a much better way to think about your labor. That's a much better way to think about your life. And ultimately, if you can't take hope in that, what can you take hope in?
Mm-hmm.
That is a good note to end this on. Ian Bremmer, Jenny Mundy, thank you both so much for joining us today. And thank you to all of you for watching our program and participating in our online polls, and to the business owners who shared a bit of their stories. I'm JJ Ramberg on behalf of GZERO Media. Have a great day.